World Series. Anyone paying any attention to that? I thought you might be. The Cubs and the Indians. I know there's a few Cubs fans and a few Indians fans here. I thought I had a Cub fan right there. So anyway, I want to talk to you about the World Series a minute, but not this World Series. That's way too political right now, and we don't need more of that. But I want to talk to you about the World Series of 1958. Now, I was not alive for that World Series. I just want to go on record. But some of you may have been alive for the 58 World Series. The 58 World Series was between the Yankees, because every World Series is against the Yankees, or at least half of them, and the Braves. It was a classic example of misplaced focus, though, that occurred in that final game. The games were deadlocked at 3-3. They were deadlocked in that last game, 3-3, and then going into the bottom of the ninth inning, and the Yankees were up to bat. And there was a player named Elston Howard, who was coming to the plate. Elston Howard stepped to the plate, and he was going to bat against the Braves' left-handed Oklahoma boy named Warren Spahn. Warren Spahn was the pitcher on the mound that day in that last game of the World Series of 58. And so there was a conference on the mound. Of course, the manager came out and the catcher came up, and they had a conference there with Warren. They reminded Warren, now you can throw anything you want, but don't throw a fastball high and away, because that's Howard's favorite pitch to hit. And if he gets a hold of that thing, he'll hit it over the fence. High and away, fastball high and away. Don't throw that pitch, whatever you do. Well, where do you think Warren threw the pitch that day? That's right. He threw it high and away. And Elston Howard took that pitch over the fence. And that was the end of the World Series. The end of the World Series. They won the game. The Yankees did again. Spahn said later that he knew he'd studied all the batters in the lineup for the Yankees. He knew Howard's strength. He knew he loved to hit the ball when it was high and away and a fastball. And he knew that so well that was constantly in his brain when Howard came up to bat. It was so there in his brain that subconsciously it led him to do what? Throw the ball right there. Throw the ball there. You see, sometimes words can distract us and cause us to lose our focus or redirect our focus in an inappropriate direction that leads to expending ourselves to achieving undesirable results, which is what happened that day in the World Series. And so today we hear this advice from the Apostle Paul as he writes in his second letter to the church of Corinth. His advice has to do with the use of giving financial resources to the church. I want you to listen to part of those words again as he talks about the generosity of the church of Macedonia. He says this: during a severe ordeal of affliction, right? That's not the best of times, in other words. In a time of severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means and even beyond their means. Now get this part. Begging us earnestly for the privilege of sharing in the ministry to the saints. Not only did they give, not only did they give to their means and beyond their means, they begged to give for the privilege to share in the ministry of the saints. That's a wonderful testimony of a body of believers. A body of believers that were focused on faithful discipleship. A church expending itself toward healthy discipleship out into the world. You see, Paul lifts up the church of Macedonia as an example for the Corinthian churches. He is gently challenging them to refocus their lives. He's challenging them. He offers them this financial giving as a way to refocus how they expend their lives. Paul calls them to this challenge when he says, I do not say this is a command, but I'm testing the genuineness of your love. It's not a command. No, it's a test of the genuineness of their love. Paul's not laying down the law here to the church of Corinth. Paul is sharing his advice. And this is not just advice, this is heartfelt advice from the Apostle Paul. Paul's words are not meant to be abrasive. He's offering them in a caring way. He's offering them in a pastoral way because he cares about this church. He cares deeply and dearly about the church in Corinth. And so this morning, as I address this text and this issue of tithing, I hope you'll not hear this as, oh, Mark's laying down the law on that tithing thing again. I hope instead you'll hear it as an honest affirmation of an opportunity to expend ourselves toward growth as disciples of Jesus Christ. A couple of questions come to mind as I think about tithing, and some people ask these questions, what is the purpose of tithing? And what is the expending ourselves by tithing? What does that bring into focus in our lives? What does that really do for my life? Well, I'd like to share with you 4 things that I believe tithing brings to our lives. 4 areas of our lives that tithing helps bring into proper focus. The first area, I believe, is when we expend ourselves by tithing, we bring our priorities into proper focus. Our priorities. Let me ask you this question. It's a rhetorical question. What takes the first place in your life? What's the most important thing in your life? You see, tithing helps us recognize that God is to be the very center of our being. It's not out here on the edges or over there or over there. It's right here, the center of our being. That God is to be the center of our being, and tithing helps us understand that God is the center of our being as the highest priority in our life. Then God informs every decision that we have to make on this life journey. Now, back in the times of the Old Testament and the agricultural economy of that day, people were told to bring not only the tithe, but they were told to bring the first fruits of their crops, the spring lamb, and bring it to the temple to offer God. Now, it's not real clear in the Old Testament how important these gifts were to the actual temple, if the temple really needed all the livestock and all the produce. But it is clear that this effort, this first fruits effort, this concept, was to remind people that God took the very first place in their lives. It was to remind the people that we live in a world that God was the first priority in their lives. And thus this act helped to put the relationship with God in the proper place in their lives. Now, tithing does not make one a better Christian in and of itself. It doesn't do that. Nor does failure to tithe make one less a Christian necessarily. However, tithing does help us focus our lives. Tithing helps us focus our priorities in life. You see, we urgently need something to help us focus our value system in these days with all the confusion and all the things that seem to be pushing and pulling at us. We live in a world floundering for priorities. Our values change with the flip of a channel. Our values change often in these days with the latest political poll, it seems like. tithing helps us to know and own what our real priorities are. George Gallup called America a place filled with seekers and searchers. Seekers and searchers. We are a country seeking and searching after true meaning in life. Gallup would agree that many Americans are searching after priorities for Christian living. By seeking to expend ourselves toward tithing, we are helping to focus those priorities in our life. The U.S. News and World Report article several years ago, was titled Junk Mail Deluge. And it could be written now about the internet and everything else and about all those ads that pop up on your screen. It said that people who fill your mailbox every year in that day and time, 34 pounds of junk mail every year. Now you think about how much junk mail you get and how much junk email you get now. And imagine if you weighed all those things together, how many pounds you now receive. It said anyway, the people who fill your mailbox with 34 pounds of junk mail each year know what you paid for your moose skin slippers. They know if you bought it with a credit card. Now they know if you bought it with PayPal. They know if you paid a check. They know how you bought it. They know how much you owe on your house, whether you have hobbies. They know if you like fly fishing or if you like horseshoes. They know that. They know whether you're buying used golf balls or you're buying new golf balls. They know that. They know this because it's simply their business to know. Direct mail, electronically or by postal service, is a booming business because it targets us with scientific precision. That's the way it works. These people know our priorities when we don't even know our priorities. Think about that. I think about that more so these days than ever before because I've been exposed to our communications team who, did you know that when we send out that electronic website, email and everything that goes out of here, that we can track who opens it, where they go, how far they go? We know all that stuff. It's amazing how much stuff we know. So be careful opening the church newsletter from now on out, okay? But seriously, we know your priorities because we know what you open and what you care about. This all reminds me of something Jesus once said about priorities. He said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That which we treasure is where our heart follows. Expending on tithing will help us focus those priorities. The second thing I believe about expending ourselves by tithing is that we bring the use of all our resources, all the resources entrusted us, into proper focus. Tithing helps us focus not only on what we give, but it also helps us focus on what we spend and what we save. I once received a comic strip from a parishioner, a friend, who reads this way. It reads this way. There's much more to stewardship than just the tithe. Questions like, how do I make my money? How do I conduct myself on the job? And how do I use the leisure time my income affords? Examining my use of the remaining 90% is much more painful than giving 10% to the Lord. Think about that. Examining my use of the remaining 90% is much more painful than the 10% I give to the Lord. When we take tithing seriously, we are very likely that we will take all our spending much more seriously. If we take tithing seriously, we will look at what we give to the church. It's likely that everything else we do with the resources available to us, we will also reconsider more deliberately and more intentionally than ever. In today's world, more than ever, we are called to be stewards. We're called to be stewards of all that we hold on to. John Wesley reportedly said this about the use of resources. He says, give all you can, Save all you can, and spend the rest with thanksgiving and joy. Give all you can, save all you can, and use the rest, spend the rest with thanksgiving and joy. Those words reflect the need for total stewardship. Total stewardship of all we hold, not just 10%. I'm proof that it's possible to live with financial creativity when we tithe. I believe that I and my family live much better on the 90% than we would on 100% of my income. Now, this is not some mathematical principle that I learned way back when I was in undergraduate business school. No, I didn't even learn it in seminary. This principle comes from a life of experience of Christian living. I'm totally committed to this principle. Tithing brings the use of all our resources into proper focus. Third, I believe that by expending ourselves by tithing, we keep the proper focus on the church. By tithing, we keep the proper focus on the church. Tithing fosters a closer tie with the community of believers. This doesn't mean, by the way, that you're going to serve on more committees, so that's the good news, okay? It doesn't mean that you're going to get to go to more meetings, because most of us don't want to go to any more meetings than we currently go to. Tithing does not mean that you're going to use more of your energy on special programs for the church. What it simply means is that when we tithe, we have a greater awareness of what the church is really all about. You see, when we tithe, we have a greater involvement in the total life of the church. Our self follows our money. You see, money is an extension of ourselves. And that's part of what Jesus meant when he said those words. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. It is part of God's plan that when we tithe, we are more deeply involved into the organized body of believers called the church. Significant giving yields significant involvement, which in turn yields significant awareness of life's meaning and the church's role in our lives and in our world. Tithing is more than an obligation. It's more than a way to just support the church. Tithing is an affirmation of a theological conviction that goes like this. The church is a God-given instrument of hope and promise for our world. The church is the God-given instrument of hope and promise for our world. Tithing helps us keep the proper focus on the church. And finally, I believe that by expending ourselves by tithing, we keep focused on spiritual growth. We keep focused on our own personal spiritual growth. There are many disciplines of the spiritual growth in the Christian tradition. But to me, tithing is, if not the most important, one of the most important of those disciplines. You may ask, why is tithing an important discipline of spiritual growth? It's important because it involves taking a risk. It involves taking a risk. And anytime you take a risk, you have to trust someone or something, don't you? It involves what Kierkegaard once called the leap of faith. The leap of faith. It's no doubt that tithing is a step of faith, especially when you take that step for the very first time. When you commit yourself to that for the very first time and say, you're going to really do this. Especially when we initiate it somewhere in the midstream of life. Tithing calls us to trust in God in an unknown area. The Old Testament prophet Malachi made it clear a couple of weeks ago in the lesson. He offered the call to tithing, and then he says this, put me to the test. Put me to the test and see if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. It's one of my favorite scriptures. Put me to the test and see if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. Malachi is challenging us to test God and see for ourselves. You see, tithing is a challenge to spiritual growth, a leap into the unknown, which can only be taken in faith. Tithing helps us focus. It helps us focus on our spiritual growth and our spiritual discipleship. If you're not a tither, I invite you to try it. If you're already tithing, I invite you to take another step this year. This next week, you're going to receive a pledge card in the mail. A pledge card is simply an opportunity to grow as a disciple. You're going to receive that card, and I pray that you'll spend some time reflecting. I pray you'll spend some time discussing and praying with your family about this important Christian discipline. Test the possibilities that are contained in the promise and the calling of the tithe. Dig deeper into the biblical record. There's more than 3,000 years of divine wisdom. And it affirms this over and over again. Tithing is a permanent institution in my life and in my family's life. I commend it to your life as a gift, as a spiritual suggestion. I suggest it as a way to properly focus your priorities, as a way to properly focus your life in the church, as a way to focus your spiritual development and growth. Expending yourself by tithing is a part of God's wisdom. Wisdom for the abundant living that Jesus Christ has promised to each and every one of us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.